as men get older, usually around 40, 42, 45, we produce less testosterone. I had my mind blown recently. I went in and had my stats all checked out, and my testosterone level came back really high. And I was like, really? Yeah. I said, so how is that happening? I'm 52 years old. I've actually been told I should start looking into testosterone replacement therapy. Like, you don't need it. You are perfect where you are right now. Like, your stats are actually really high. I said, how is that possible? I've always thought that men, we lose it. And she said, no, people who don't get proper rest lose it.
Welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. Today I'm joined by Yogi Aaron. This is going to be a great conversation about anything related to yoga. I want to talk about energy, and I want to talk about how you can take your health, your mind, or your mental state, including what you refer to as energy, to a whole new level. Yogi Aaron is a trailblazing yoga teacher who's leading a global rebellion against the harmful practice of stretching. Let's have a talk about this. I make a joke. I say, hey, listen, yoga is the union of the body, mind, and spirit. And if you're a real blokey bloke and you don't like it, just call it stretching. But I understand they're two very different things, Aaron, so we'll talk about that in a moment. Yogi Aaron's approach to this has been pioneered in many ways in terms of the groundbreaking research and approach to yoga, because he shows people a pain-free way of activating muscles through what he calls applied yoga anatomy and muscle activation, AYAMA. I know that in this world of conventional stretching and flexibility practices, often prescribed for pain, what Aaron is doing and the way we can look at this unorthodox method might give some really useful tools for a more permanent solution. So we'll have that conversation. I always say a flexible body is a flexible mind. And if we can get into the body and understand the power of this divine vessel and how to improve it and how to strengthen it while creating flexibility and movement and flow, we can experience the beauty of this health and vitality throughout our life. Either we're investing in it or we're not. So today's conversation is going to be, I think, a really important one. So with Yogi Aaron, I think what sets him apart is his infectious humor, his beautiful spirit. We had a great chat before we jumped on. It was just joy and smile, and also his personal healing journey as well. So welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. Yogi Aaron, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And what a privilege it is to speak with you. Thank you.
You know, it's my pleasure, buddy. And I'm a certified yoga teacher too. I've done my 400 hours. I've been teaching yoga on and off for some years. I used to own a franchise of yoga studios. And the reason why I did that is because I recognized that the profound benefits of this practice, mental, physical and spiritual, is beyond that I could comprehend at the time. And I just knew that if I did it, I would get well. If I did it, I would be happy. If I did it, I would be me. The old saying, you drive to the yoga class and someone cuts you off in traffic and it's like, asshole. You drive from the yoga class and someone cuts you off and it's like, namaste. Right? So we have to recognize the power of this. Tell me, in your eyes, why yoga? For those out there going, I don't like it, I don't know, whatever, even if you love it, tell us, please, why yoga?
Why yoga? I think you just said it perfectly yourself. Yoga just makes you a better person and makes you more tolerable to people that have to put up with you.
Yep.
How does it work? Almost any kind of yoga class you take, and I say that with some hesitancy, of course, but I think it's sort of true across the board that almost any kind of yoga class you take, there's going to be some work with uniting the breath with the mind. And so what does that mean? Means that I'm going to start to consciously breathe. Anytime we start to consciously breathe, and I'm not talking about okay, everybody just take a breath in and out. Like doing that as a practice for an hour and a half, that's potent. And that's going to have a serious effect on your momentum. Before you went to yoga class, I don't know if I can say this or not, but I'm going to say it. You were an asshole. and then after yoga class, you're actually a more pleasant version of yourself. Why is that? Because there's a part of you, your momentum in your mind was going one direction, anger, frustration, A-type personality, checklist of things to do. After yoga class, all of that is brought inward. Your mind turns inward, and it's inward where the source of our happiness is. And so my teacher often says that everybody across the board, pretty much, unless you're the Dalai Lama, learned at some point in their life that happiness existed outside of us. Yoga is the process of reminding ourselves where the real source of happiness is. And so in a yoga practice, when we start training the mind to go back inward, we need to retrain the mind, teach the mind so that the mind remembers, yeah, the source of happiness is within us. And that at the core is why we see so many people becoming positively affected by yoga. And even people who don't want to be positively affected by yoga are positively affected by yoga.
Yeah. Even sometimes if they don't do it, but they're with the partner that does yoga, they're going to be positively affected by yoga.
Absolutely. You know, my ex-partner once said to me, have you done your yoga today? I think you should go do your yoga.
I say that to my partner too. I say, hey, listen, when I'm thinking, when I'm in a shitty state, tell me to go and do my practice. And honestly,
Yeah.
Aaron, I have to admit, like I often say that I do, and I used to say this as well for years, I do yoga as a gift from me to me. It's a gift and a fundamental necessity for my mental and emotional well-being because I've got a lot of energy, ADHD kind of personality. I'm successful in business. I've got a lot on. I've got a big checklist. I've got a to-do list. I've got a child. I've got a place to take care of. I've got the busyness in my life, like many people listening and viewing. So how do you get the busyness out of your life? Well, you may not be able to remove it, but what you can do is you can center yourself. When I do yoga, I'm finally able to reconnect with the true essence of me. So for me, when the mind says, I don't want to do yoga, great. That's when I do yoga. And it's such a powerful thing. You know, the old saying, I love this. I'll give you a good one. You can use this one if you like. Saying that you're too inflexible to do yoga is saying that you're too dirty to take a bath. What do you mean you're not flexible? That's like saying I can't go to the gym because my muscles aren't big enough. It's just the craziest thing that the mind makes up. Okay, I want to ask you. Let's go a little bit esoteric now because we get the practice. We understand there's different types of yoga. Okay, you're from your hatha to your vinyasa to your yin to whatever. And I think I know many of our listeners and viewers got a pretty good grasp on this. But I want to go back and talk about the ancient yogis. I know from my studies, I mean, these guys lived for a very long time. Some of them were breatharians. Some of them were able to supposedly dematerialize at will, and so on and so forth. Just tell me, if someone was to, like you, for example, devote themselves into this practice, or even just take some of the ancient tools of this ancient practice, what are some of those tools potentially for rejuvenation and spiritual awakening? What are your thoughts in that higher regard of what the real essence of yoga is capable of doing for someone?
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said on many levels. But to answer your question very directly, the real secret of what these people were able to accomplish, you mentioned like dematerialize and materialize. Swami Rama of the Himalayas could change his weight at different levels, and I mean, some of the powers that we hear about, and some of us have actually seen, is mind staggering. The real source of that is going to blow your listeners' minds. The real source of it is relaxation. At the end of the day, it's your ability to relax. And it's a really hard thing. I'm just going to acknowledge, I think it's a really hard thing for especially the A-type personalities out there. the ADHD people. They're like, I can't do that. I can't relax, And by the way, I'm acknowledging that because I am one of those personality modes. I'm very A-type, very ADHD. And so for me, the only way when I was younger to calm down was by doing a lot. And I kind of started to realize by doing a lot, I was doing nothing, which is a whole thing to unpack in and of itself. But what I've come to learn is that the real source of all of these things lies in their ability to go into these deep states of relaxation. And there's a whole science around it. But one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this specifically is because you mentioned a lot of these yogis live for a long time. And what we know from science, and I always like to bring it back to science, and what we know about science is that, for example, I'm a man, you're a man. And so one of the things that we need to produce is testosterone. And so as men get older, usually around 40, 42, 45, we produce less testosterone. I had my mind blown recently. I went in and had my stats all checked out, and my testosterone level came back really high. And I was like, really? And yeah. I said, so how is that happening? I'm 52 years old. I've actually been told I should start looking into testosterone replacement therapy. You don't need it. You are perfect where you are right now. Your stats are actually really high. I said, how is that possible? I've always thought that men, we lose it. And she said, no, people who don't get proper rest lose it. This was a doctor that told me this. It blew my mind. And of course, it's a doctor in Costa Rica. I don't know what a US doctor would say, but what that told me was that it's rest. It was a reaffirmation of what we already know. We need to, in order for us to regenerate, we need to be able to go into that deep state of rest. And then sadly enough, and this being a yoga studio owner, what is the pose that's the most important pose? And how often is that pose actually practiced? It's relaxation pose, shavasana, corpse pose. So many yoga teachers just brush it off, and yet it's the one pose where we can positively affect people on so many levels. And one of those, of course, is literally this restoration of all of those hormonal balances, the rebalancing of the endocrine system. Everything just gets positively affected. Even bone density. There's studies around bone density and relationship to relaxation. So my teacher, Swami Rama of the Himalayas, he was known to do all these incredible feats. And it didn't come out of pranayama. A lot of people think it comes out of pranayama and some of these other crazy practices. It wasn't that at all. It was relaxation. The ability to go in and relax. And of course, it's much more involved than that. But at the simplest term is practice relaxation.
I love that. Thank you. And it's interesting you should say that, because I went through a really interesting time in my life as an entrepreneur, very successful, but very often I would say in fight or flight. And I measured through my clinics, blood tests and whatever else, over 10 years, I measured my hormones. And I was in my 30s at the time. And my hormones in terms of my testosterone were normally lower than average. And I'm like, hang on, I eat better than most people. I exercise regularly. I don't get it. And I looked good and I felt okay, but my testosterone was below average for my age. And I was like, this is interesting. This I don't understand. I tried everything, Aaron, and I did my blood tests over and over again, year in and year out. And then the last thing that I tried was to relax. The last thing that I tried was I sold my businesses in 2016. I said, you know what, stuff this. I'm off into Peru. I went in the jungle to sit in stillness and find myself. And my testosterone levels went through the roof. And now that I'm in my 40s, my testosterone levels are higher than when I was in my early 30s, because I've recognized that the most dangerous thing for my masculinity in terms of my production of testosterone was stress. I love that you speak about this, buddy. Very cool.
It's very powerful, and it just illustrates, like, it's interesting because I don't know what it's like in Australia, but over in North America, there's all kinds of conversations about men and testosterone, and I'll just leave the interesting part at interesting. But what I come back to is like how many people are so stressed out, and we, as I think as an overall Western society, especially, don't talk enough about the detriments of stress and how the anecdote to that. It's like the anecdote is often, well, just don't look at your phone as much, or just, breathe, take a couple more breaths in the day. But it's a lot more involved than that. You literally have to just kind of like take moments to pause, go and lie down. I practice, it's a yoga technique called yoga nidra. And yoga nidra translates to yogic sleep or conscious sleep. And so I try and do that about 3-4 times a week. And that's the game changer for me. And it helps me sleep so much better. I get so much more done. And the funny thing is, and I'm sure you could relate to this, it's like part of your brain is going, or your mind is going, I should go relax. And the other part is going, but you have way too much to do. That's the constant struggle. But when we do go relax, we actually get done like 3-4 times more than what we would have, because we're more focused and centered.
Let's get really clear on this. This is the never-ending battle between presence and the busy mind. I know that the mind is busy. I know that people say something like, I can't meditate because my mind's so busy. I mean, again, that's like saying you're too dirty to take a bath. If your mind is busy and you meditate and your mind stays busy, good, it's working. If your mind is busy and you do yoga and your mind stays busy during the yoga class, good, it's working. But trust me, after the yoga class, it'll be less busy. I love this. And I know that there is no excuses anymore. There are classes on YouTube. There are classes online in subscription-based type services that people can follow. And there are, of course, your local yoga studios as well. When people look for yoga and they find a practice, what would you say would be one of the top 1 or 2 tools that you think that they could apply to maintain a regular yoga practice for life? What would be some of the things that you've realized over seeing so many students over the years?
In the yoga tradition, we talk about this idea of faith, and the Sanskrit word is shraddha, and shraddha also translates as a joyful state of mind, cultivating a joyful state of mind. And part of the problem when a lot of people get into something new, it's usually done out of desperation. People get into an exercise routine because they feel like they should, because they need to lose 30 pounds, because they know that they need to, they haven't done anything for 45 years. So they take up a New Year's resolution to start something. Or like a spiritual practice, people lose a family member. Something tragic happens in their life. And so they take up a spiritual practice because they're questioning things in their life. And it's great that they're doing that, but that's not a good enough reason or a big enough reason to do it. You have to understand the why, and the why has got to be big enough so that if you weren't in the pursuit of fulfilling it, then you know that you would be miserable. It's understanding that dual knowledge of, I need to have this, and without it, I'm going to be miserable. And so part of that joyful state of mind is rested in the knowledge of why you are doing something, and that you know that by doing this thing, you're going to live a more fulfilled life. That's where the real teaching of faith comes from. I find it fascinating that these use of words. So understanding your why, if you're just kind of picking up yoga as a fad, or because you feel like you should, or because your friends are doing it, it won't last. And because your why isn't big enough, there has to be a real yearning to understand, knowing there has to be a yearning that this practice is going to guide you to manifesting and living your life purpose. And that you know that without manifesting and living your life purpose, you're going to not fulfill or live your best life. And so it's having that dual knowledge. And so that's my biggest recommendation. Get clear about your why. Having said that, oftentimes doing the yoga practice, and I'm sure you've had this experience, as I know I did when I got into yoga, that your purpose starts to become more and more revealed to you as you do it. And so for me, there was this love of practice that happened organically. The more I did yoga, my ADD started not having such a grip on me. I was able to have more focus, more clarity. As I had more clarity, I was noticing like I had more sense of purpose and direction in my life. So I think you can kind of hold two ideas, at the same time.
Yeah.
One fed into the other.
And of course, also recognizing how we can be grounded, centered, relaxed, have an equilibrated mind, a peaceful presence when we do have such a practice. And again, that's why yoga is my gift to me, because when I do, I can show up as a better father. I can show up as a better lover. I can show up as a better leader. And it really makes this profound difference. So again, I love this. The why. I said the greater the why, the higher we fly. When the why, the spiritual reason, the emotional reason why is big enough, all the how takes care of itself. So you got two choices. One, you do yoga. Two, you don't. And if you end up doing yoga and giving it a try for 30 days, you might just realize that you feel more peaceful, that you are more able to respond without the emotional side of things that you might regret later. And moreover, just the moreover of a peaceful presence in your life. I absolutely love it. And I want to just bring it back one more time to talking about the ancient practices. There's a lot of talk about Kundalini, right? And we talk about this life force energy that creates a baby when the sperm meets the egg and it creates new life. And then, of course, there is the conversation of how can we transmute this sexual energy through brahmacharya type practices and other type practices, where instead of, spilling the seed or wasting the energy, we could actually cultivate that energy through pranayama practices, through potentially other practices as well, and then to be able to use this life force energy for not just rejuvenation of the body, but for creation of something beautiful in our lives. Can you tell us what is your sense, your take on the dormant energy of Kundalini and potentially the power that it has in terms of benefits in our lives?
That's a very loaded question for such a short podcast interview.
Yeah. Well, take it wherever you want to take it.
I would say this, that there's right off the bat, I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding around Kundalini. So I feel like before I say anything else, I just want to put that out there. Like there's just a lot of smoke and mirrors around this idea of Kundalini. Having said that, so Kundalini is a latent power that we all have within us. There's, sometimes you can call it like awakening to who you are in the world. Like you hear people that have had a Kundalini awakening and all of a sudden they have perfect clarity of themselves and the universe, and all the answers of the universe come into them. And some people go a little crazy because they just can't deal with that in that moment. So you do hear stories like that. Kundalini also refers to our own latent potential. A good example of that is like Mozart. This kid awoken at a very young age, and we see other child prodigies like him who have tapped into this potential. And where does that come from? And the yogic answer is it's something within us that was awakened. In the biblical story of Saul on the way to Damascus had his own Kundalini awakening, and where he had a connection with the divine, and then he became Paul and changed the course of his life. A lot of us have that, and we have it at different levels in our practice, I believe that most people, when they're doing yoga, any kind of yoga, doesn't matter even if it's Bikram yoga, there is that potential of awakening that can happen. And so that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that it's the job of the yogi. And by the way, what I'm saying here is completely two different conversations. So I'm kind of presented it for one answer. The other answer is, or another way of looking at this is, it's the job of a yogi to gather as much life force prana to us. And so each of us, in Taoism, they say we have a cup. And every time we express anger, part of that dissipates and it doesn't return. The yoga, we kind of have a bit of a different take on it, but the idea is still somewhat similar in that we're wanting to constantly make sure that our cup is overflowing. We're here to gather all the prana of the universe to us, and we're filling this vessel up. However, it needs to be directed. It needs to be focused. And so I kind of look at the practices of pranayama in a couple of different ways, but one of the ways, which for me is the definition of pranayama, is understanding that the energy inside me, the life force energy, and by the way, the definition of prana is that which animates. So that which animates me is also the same that is animating the universe. And what my practice is doing is helping me to awaken to that truth. There's a beautiful quote from a very cheesy science fiction show where basically one of the main characters goes, "We are all bits and pieces of stardust, the universe made manifest trying to figure itself out." And so what that's saying is, like, everything that's in the universe is also that which makes me up. And so in yoga, the more I awaken to that, the more I am ability to awaken to that Kundalini. And so in these kind of Kundalini practices, what they're ultimately doing is obviously filling you with pranic energy, but they're also bypassing that critical thinking part of your mind that is like, what's this? What's that? I'm really small. I'm really tiny. You bypass all of that so that your higher mind starts to go, oh my God, I am the universe made manifest trying to figure itself out. So that, I don't know if that answered your question, but those are my kind of takes on it. My short answer takes.
I know. I love it. I love it, Aaron. Thank you very much. And honestly, the Kundalini conversation that we're having, it needs to be respected and, for me, revered in terms of reverence, because there is this dormant power, and it is supposedly at the base of the spine. I've had major experiences with this myself, and it is not something to play around with. It is something to practice with respect. It is something to do under the guidance of a authentic teacher such as Yogi Aaron and many others. And then when it does begin to awaken, a lot of realizations will happen in life. And it is, also said that people who have had Kundalini awakening type experiences and they haven't been ready for it have had difficulties integrate. But having said that, without any, of the scarcity here, coming back to it, the accumulation of prana, okay, it's like filling up like a battery. Can you tell us a little bit about how this works? Is it, as you mentioned, dormant at the base of the spine? Is it in the Muladhara, in the root center? Is our job to move it up the spine? How would one go about this if one was to follow the original practice?
You really are diving into.
Are we going too deep?
So no, I mean, I don't know how your listeners are going to take this, but Krishnamacharya said it best, I think. He said the definition of a yogi is one whose spine is full of light. And so what this is saying to us is this, that prana is either moving into our spine or away from our spine. And so the simple answer is get prana into our spine or get prana into this vessel, okay? Why is prana leaking? Well, prana is leaking because we're constantly our attention is constantly outside of ourselves. We're, thinking about our kid that we have to take care of. We're thinking about our wife that's, not happy with us right now, and we have to take care of her needs. And we're stressed out about paying the mortgage. And, so our attention is constantly going outside of ourselves, and, or we're chasing happiness outside of ourselves, right? And so what Krishnamacharya was saying is like, turn that attention inward. And so therefore, ergo yoga practice. That's why all yoga practices become one of the reasons why most yoga practices, if not all, eventually become like a Kundalini awakening, potential for Kundalini awakening, because we're ideally turning our attention inwards. So what we're looking to do in a simple way, not a simple way, but in a profound way to begin awakening that potential, is doing practices that are turning our attention inwards. And I'm giving a very layman's kind of answer, but that's sort of it in a nutshell. Then you kind of get into more of the other deeper practices of starting to awaken this potential energy. But one of the things that I want to make very clear, and this kind of goes into this conversation about why people become a little loco, when they do Kundalini experiences or have that experience, because they don't have there's two reasons. They don't have the capacity to hold this awakening. Imagine like you're just walking around in life, and then all of a sudden you do a little breathing practice, and then all the answers of the universe kind of descend upon you. What are you supposed to do with that? When you see yourself and your place in the universe, that can scare the crap out of people. They don't have the capacity to hold that knowledge. They don't have the capacity to have that awareness. And I've experimented a lot with this with different students. I've pushed some students to like a lot. And I'm not talking about how much they can put their foot behind their head. I'm talking about like different pranayama practices. And I've kind of like seen like how people hold that differently. And then I've done it with other groups of people and seen like it starts to unleash their crazy, because they don't know what to do with this extra energy. It's just too much for them. And so one of the things that I come back to again and again is, don't worry about the Kundalini per se. Get stable, learn how to breathe properly, learn how to relax, and learn how to bring your attention inward. But the other thing I want to kind of put a pin in this conversation is that prana is power. So I use the word like it literally translates to that which animates. But in its most distilled definition, it means power. So anytime you put power plus something, that something is going to become more, right? So if you're an angry person and you start doing pranayama practices, you're just going to become more of an angry person. If you're an unstable person, and that's, I know, is a loaded statement, but we'll just keep it simple for now. If you're an unstable person, you start doing more pranayama, you're just going to become powerfully unstable. And so there's such an emphasis in the tradition, before we get into doing these kinds of practices, work on getting stable. And one of the ways to do that, one-to-one breathing, practice relaxation, practice meditation, practice doing things where you get still and you can start to teach yourself how to come inward. Once you start to get good at that, then we start to do these other practices and slowly and gradually start to build this vessel up. But we need to first work on your capacity, your ability to hold big things in your space, to hold big ideas in your space.
Thank you. And thank you also for entertaining the big idea of the question of Kundalini. And I totally agree. This is very important. A lot of times I think people want to bypass the groundwork and get straight to the, hey, let's give me some more life force here and I can do these. No, no, no. Let's get real. Let's get solid. Let's get grounded. Let's get into our bodies. Let's get present. Let's get relaxed. Follow a really good yoga teacher over a period of time until you have been told that you might be ready to expand. I think this is really important to follow the basics here. Aaron, many years ago when I was in business and I worked a lot, I've heard a lot about these energy centers, the chakras, right? And I say it's kind of like, okay, it's like hearing about meditation. It's like hearing about yoga. That's great. But if you don't do anything about it, it's a waste of time. Everyone's known or heard about yoga. Most people have heard about meditation, but how many people are practicing and meditating regularly? So knowing about it, hearing about it doesn't really make any difference. Same with the chakras. We have heard about them. We know that they're, potential 7 major ones, 112 in total, maybe more. We kind of know that, but really no one's, as far as I'm concerned, or very few are practicing, what we could practice in terms of these chakras. So can you tell me what's your understanding of the chakras and how can we empower ourselves to utilize them in the most appropriate way?
So for full disclosure, I have a whole course on the chakras. and the chakras is, and in the Yogi Club, I mean, people can contact me. It's one of my favorite conversations. I love talking about chakras. And
YogiAaron.com. Everybody, if this is useful,
YogiAaron.com.
YogiAaron.com. Okay, back to you.
But you're asking some of my favorite questions because I love talking about chakras. So, whether or not you believe the chakras, so I kind of always like to preface the conversation. There's some evidence to show that there's these energetic centers. My teacher, Alan, can tell you, show you, as the fetus is being, the embryo is developing, he can actually point to, there's the line of the chakras. You can see them in the cells and then the whole body, forms around it. Alan is amazing to listen to. So if you don't want to accept that as truth, the fact of the matter is that the yogis tapped into this idea of these different places in the body that correspond to different parts of our mind. So let me give you a quick example, talk about root chakra, and the root chakra is the chakra of survival. And so it's all about, fear, sex, food, and sleep. The 4 things. And part of the work in the first chakra is to get, I used that word before, stable, to get stable there. And so we can do that in different ways. And that's where the different chakra practices come into play. We can focus on cultivating stability just by bringing our attention to our root center and breathing in a certain way there. We can also do certain yoga postures, and that will affect that chakra. We can do different breathing practices. We can do different meditation practices. We can incorporate the idea of colors, just by focusing on different colors, that will have a powerful effect. And so as we do these different practices, we start to positively affect these chakras. Now, what does positively affect these chakras? I always like to tell people, my teacher, when I first started working with my teacher, one of the very first practices he gave to me was a chakra practice, which I diligently did for many years afterwards. And then I started going into deeper studies of the chakras. There's a great, I think it's one of the best chakra books out there. It's called Kundalini Tantra. And it's written by the Bihar school, and it systematically goes through all of the chakras and the chakra practices. And that's where I drew upon a lot of my own experience in
What's it
when
called?
I'm teaching the
Kundalini?
chakras. Kundalini Tantra.
Tantra.
And yeah. And so it goes through systematically all of the practices, or so many different practices in there of how to awaken the chakras. And they're very specific. So the practices are very specific. But The most simplest way to begin awakening the chakras is just by drawing your attention there and breathing into those spaces. And that can start to have a profound impact. The chakra has three different elements. It has the element of mind, of thought. It has an element. So in our elements, we're the basic elements: earth, water, fire, air, space. And then the third eye is the element of mind. And then energy. And so by bringing those three ideas or those three qualities to each of the chakras, we can start to have a positive effect. What is at different in each of the chakras? Each of the chakras contain those latent potentials, Kundalini, those latent potentials within us that are just waiting to be activated. A lot of us are walking around in life having activated, I say this without judgment, our more worse tendencies. We've kind of activated those tendencies of anger, of jealousy, of envy, of whatever, and of distraction. That's a tendency, being distracted. And so what we're looking to do is to activate the tendencies to become the best version of ourselves, to bring our life, our karma, more in line with our purpose, our dharma. And so both of those can start to mirror each other effortlessly. This is the promise of the chakras. When we start to work in the chakras and we do some chakra balancing, which, by the way, is not hard to do. It's not as complicated as you think. But when we start to do that work, we start to align those two things. Our karma becomes our dharma, that we become our life, instead of living a life full of reaction, of, running around like a tail chasing its tail. We actually start to become more aligned, and we can start to live life's purpose. I always have deep gratitude to my teacher because when I first met him, I was just sort of starting on the path, and I started this practice, and I went on to open up a big yoga studio in New York. I went on to do work all over the world. And then that led me to opening up a yoga retreat center in Costa Rica. And I really point all of the success of that ultimately to that chakra practice that he gave to me.
Wow, wonderful. All right, Yogi Aaron, I've got two more questions for you. You
Just
have
two.
Let's go. Or maybe we can talk all day. This is so good.
You've asked some very deep, profound questions.
I know. That's what I love doing in this podcast, because no one wants to listen to a podcast where we ask all the standard questions, right? So we want to ask the questions that, okay, let's trigger the mind and let's get some outcomes here. I mean, hopefully my prayer for this conversation is that listeners and viewers out there decide to study, decide to, more importantly, practice over a long period of time. Give yourself a 30, 60, 90-day promise to just get out there and just give it a go, and just write down how you feel now, how your life is now, and see where it is in 90 days. And you'll see with 90 days of yoga, it won't be the same. And then you can choose. For me, the mind will say, I'm too busy to do yoga. For example, I'm doing yoga in about an hour and a half. And there's a part of me that goes, well, I've got emails waiting. Exactly why I need to do that yoga practice. So if you can override that mind, the lower mind that says I'm too busy, and devote yourself to that most important muscle called self-discipline, even if it's just 10 minutes, 15 minutes of practice, get into that regularly, and you will not recognize yourself in 3 months from now. So I think that is my prayer for everyone listening, that you just give yoga a go. And if you're already a practicing yogi, see what you can do to deepen your practice and to deepen your awareness of breath, and just see where you're going to be in the future. Maybe go to Costa Rica and hang out with Yogi Aaron and do some yoga there. Who knows, right? But thank you. Yeah, I like different questions. So I've got two more. You ready?
Yes. Yeah, go.
Let's go. You wrote a book, and it's called Stop Stretching, a new yogic approach to master the body and live pain-free. Tell me, why stop stretching?
When we're stretching, we basically affect that neuromuscular connection in the body negatively. And the brain or the central nervous system is constantly connected to the muscles. That's called proprioception. And so that there's a feedback loop going on. And when the muscle senses that it needs to contract, it sends messages to the central nervous system in the form of gamma motor neuron coactivation. When we start to pull a muscle beyond what its capacity is, that's going to create a stress, and that proprioception immediately gets cut off. Now, you being a doctor probably wonder, well, Yogi Aaron, how do you know this to be true? Because we can test it. We can test the force output of a muscle before stretching and after stretching. And that's how come we know it can be weak or weakened. So for example, if you're lying on your back and I've gotten all of your hip flexors strong, I can test the force output of the leg by trying to maybe bringing the leg to 30 degrees and trying to push down. And that leg won't move. I won't be able to press it down. If I start to stretch the hamstrings, then it's going to actually not only weaken the hamstrings, it's going to weaken all of the reciprocal muscles around the hamstrings, the agonist and the antagonistic muscles. So that's what I found, is that when I was stretching, it was actually making me weaker. I got into yoga. My initial why was because I didn't want to get old. I didn't want to have an old body. And so I noticed that as we get older, a lot of people that looked old and were older just had limitations in range of motion. They looked tight. And so I thought, I need to stretch more. So that's why I got into yoga. But the funny thing is, or the ironic thing is, that I actually started to hurt myself. And as I started to do more yoga, I hurt myself more and more. I didn't make the connection to the stretching. It would take me about 25 years. And I ended up in the emergency room of a hospital with an orthopedic surgeon saying to me that I might need a spinal fusion in my lower back. And that was a moment when I thought, oh my God, this is exactly why I was doing all of this yoga, this stretching. I'm going to refer to it as stretching now. This is why I was doing all of this kind of stretching yoga, because I was trying to avoid this exact same, thing. So that kind of got me into a place of asking the question, what don't I know? What don't I understand? And that led me into this whole world of muscle activation. And what I came to understand is I've forgotten one of the old sort of paradigms or truisms about muscles, which is muscles move bones, muscles stabilize joints. In order to move bones and stabilize joints, muscles have to be able to contract and contract on demand. And in other words, they need to be able to shorten. And so that was when I started to flip the script on this idea of trying to stretch to get better muscle function, instead start focusing more on improving muscle function by getting them to be able to contract and contract properly.
Mm-hmm. Got it. That's cool. Okay, one last question straight off the cuff. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, so here we go. I want you now to imagine that you are on the world stage. Every sentient being alive is tuning in, present, watching, and listening to your message to the world right now. When you're ready, take a breath and do share, Yogi Aaron. What is your message to the world right now? 2
messages. 1, you have a purpose to fulfill. Dedicate yourself to understanding what that purpose is. I'm not talking about trying to achieve a goal, or it's not related to, having a house or anything like that. It's basically, what are you going to leave the world? And I can't remember who said it off the top of my head, but the goal of life is to learn to love and to leave a legacy. So what is your intrinsic legacy? That's part of your purpose. The second message is, you don't have to live with pain. So many people just kind of resign themselves to the fact that, well, I have chronic pain in my shoulders. I have chronic pain in my back. I have chronic pain in my hips. I just have to learn to deal with it. No, you don't. You don't have to live with pain. There are answers. There are solutions. And it is your birthright to live your best life, that is free of pain. I'm not going to talk about the emotional pain. I'm talking about the physical pain right now. The emotional pain, that's a whole other conversation. But, I think that so many people are emotionally miserable because they're physically miserable. And how can people be happy when they're constantly thinking about the pain in their shoulders I was talking to a 30-year-old gentleman literally today, who is dealing with sciatica. And I was like, oh my God, you don't have to deal with this. There are answers. And he said, in an email response, he said, I've already started doing some of your things and the pain is down by 90%. It can happen that quickly when we have the right information. So I just want to really let people know you don't have to live with pain.
Oh, I love that. Ladies and gentlemen, yogiaaron.com is the website, yogiaaron.com. You also have a 7-day pain-free series that you can find on the website. Yes. And also Yogi_Aaron is Instagram. And of course, Yogi Aaron in one word is the practice on YouTube. Thank you for your devotion to the practice, your message to our audience, and for giving us the opportunity to learn more about yoga, about prana, about chakras, about ourselves. And I invite everyone listening and watching to reach out to Aaron if you have any questions. And of course, also sit with the question, what kind of practice, what kind of challenge, what kind of time period do I want to devote myself to an ongoing regular practice to see how my life will improve based on that practice? Yogi Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. You have no idea.
As did I. I'm sure we'll see each other at some point in time when I come to Costa Rica.
Yes.
Namaste.
Namaste. Be well.
Be well.